When someone shares from their heart and their soul, it's a powerful, powerful thing for all of us. It's not something you do easily, and it's only done in something that we call safe space, a place that honors each of us individually, and a place that honors the Spirit, which we call holy, as a group. I invite you now to think for a moment about the space called Israel. You remember all those stories you read in Sunday school? You remember how they had trouble with each other? And of course, we remember the stories from the Gospels. Well, today we have that story from long ago, that story called the Ten Commandments. How many of you here have read the Ten Commandments within the last month? This church wins a prize. There were at least 3 people. The Ten Commandments is this document, right, in there. It actually is in several different places in our scriptures, and it's long, and I could read it to you. But guess what? I'm not going to. It's printed in the bulletin if you want to read along. If I get boring, go ahead and read it. But I'm not going to read it because I want you to just remember them or have trouble remembering them. That's okay too. Last Sunday, according to what I know, and I hope it is correct, Stephanie talked about going barefoot and the burning bush. Well, this Sunday, I just want you to know a whole lot has happened in the story. I mean, after all, Moses, he finally went back. He stared down the Pharaoh. Or maybe the Pharaoh stared down Moses and Aaron. Not sure exactly which one won, but then there were the plagues. You remember all the plagues? Or have trouble remembering the plagues? You remember that was the first Passover back then. You know what the Passover is? Or not? And then finally we remember that Pharaoh said, "Oh, go away." Then he had a change of heart, and he tried to get them back, but they got away. And now they're wandering in the wilderness. They've been wandering there all week. They've been out there, and they have been complaining. You should have heard it. First, they didn't have enough food. They didn't have enough water. Then they didn't like the way that Aaron and Moses were leading them. And then they didn't like the way Moses was leading them. Oh, every pastor knows about that. And then Moses says, "Okay, I'm going to go have a conversation with God. We're going to figure this out." Right? And what does he do? He goes up on this mountain and leaves them alone. They get into big trouble when they're left alone. They're just like all of us. Left alone, we have a tendency to get ourselves into trouble. What did they do? They built an idol. Oh my gosh, an idol. We don't believe in idols, do we? No, we don't. I knew it. Well, for many of us, the understanding of what happened on that mountain and what happened afterwards when Moses came down is forever, ever colored by Cecil B. DeMille and Charleston Heston. I am sorry, it's just the way it is in this culture. The authoritative, the drama, the threat that Moses, let's see, was it this hand or this hand that he, up there high, It's enough to scare anybody. The law is given. Break it at your own peril. Well, perhaps that really was the way the Ten Commandments were given to the Israelites. But perhaps it was given differently than that. Historically, what we know is that the Middle Eastern societies were not monotheistic. They had lots of gods hanging out, lots of gods under this bush and that bush, and a couple of them over there and a couple of them over here. And what we know is that instead of being at the mercy of fickle, whimsical, malicious gods that constantly either had to be avoided, had to be appeased, the Israelites found this God who actually liked them, created them. We might say that God created a space within which positive relationships, both with God and with each other, became possible. Free from superstition and free from fear. This idea of monotheism, though, was not the only marker, was not the only boundary that the Israelite people had in defining their life and the security of their community. In the language of faith, we would assert that God gave the commandments to facilitate the community of Israel, God's people, allowing them to live together in harmony and internal security. Not limits on their behavior, but a space that liberated them for life together. Excuse me. The commandments created a particular and a positive life space. You shall have no other gods. You shall not make idols. You shall not worship idols. You shall not wrongly use God's name. You shall observe the Sabbath. You shall love the Lord your God. And with respect to people, you shall honor your father and mother. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife. You shall not desire your neighbor's property. Not rules to limit life or limit your behavior, but rather marks that mark out a space that you can live in, that we can live in, that God's people can live in. And with these 13 prescriptions for human relationship with God and community, a unique way of life was created in this world. Amen. But you know humans, you know what we're like. We're never content. We're extremely creative and even malicious now and again. So over the years, the commandments kept getting expanded and expanded, and we ended up with how many commandments in the Jewish law? Oh, 600 or more. And it became so right that life was determined by these 600 plus rules. And it became the way of righteousness to determine whether you were a good person by what you didn't do. Did you cook on Sabbath? If so, you're a bad person. Not, did you worship on Sabbath? The negative took over. Now, We all know what Jesus thought about this. We all know that throughout the gospel, Jesus demonstrated and reminds people that good relationships are more important than rules, are in fact the fulfillment of the law. So when the scribe asks him, which commandment is first of all? He answers, the first is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And the second is, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There's no other commandment greater than these. We know God's people. We know the space that God's people live in. We, you and I, know that we are invited into the space created by these commandments. So let's live there. Amen.